project on eugenics. Eugenics is defined as the science of improving a human population by controlled breeding to increase the occurrence of desirable heritable characteristics. Largely developed by Francis Galton as a method of improving the human race that fell into disfavor only after its perversion of its doctrines by the Nazis. There are advantages to eugenics and there are disadvantages. Some advantages are the discovery of the Human Genome Project, stem cells, and gene therapy. So disadvantages are that, well, the risk of repeating past mistakes, such as ethnic cleansing, who's to define what perfection is, and eugenics could end up being forced on people, or they could feel coerced into the choice.
We all know Sir Francis Galton coined the phrase eugenics, but where did the idea actually start? It was Darwin's theory of natural selection that created the idea of eugenics. Darwin believed that a lesser phenotype would be eaten and die, and a greater phenotype would be able to survive and breed. Eugenics and natural selection are very similar in the idea that heredity has become the basis of both ideas. Heredity is the idea that genes will be passed down from generation to generation. Superior genes will be able to survive, breed, adapt, and pass down the genes, whereas lesser genes will be eliminated. Gregor Mendel was the first person to be able to prove the idea of heredity. He used white and purple pea plants and cross-pollinated them. This created a full generation of purple pea plants. Then, he cross-pollinated those to create a full generation of white and purple pea plants. This proved that genes were passed down by both parents, and this later created the idea of eugenics. In 1909, Americans decided to use eugenics to create a more superior human race. The hypothesis was that if people sterilized and neutered any person with undesirable traits and promoted the reproduction of those with desirable traits, they could make a more superior human species and eventually eliminate mental retardation, low IQ, and diseases. They started by defining superior and inferior traits, such as length and width of nose, shape and width of eye, shape of head, ear size, making sure they had no genetic or mental disorders, no predisposition to alcoholism. Basically, everything about you had to be in some type of range, determined by scientists as superior. If it wasn't, you were deemed unfit to reproduce, then sterilized. The Nazis studied and implemented the American eugenics standard. Initially, American scientists applauded the Nazi initiative until it took a very dark turn. Now, where did the science go all wrong? First, if we began breeding wild animals and interfering with natural selection, we would create an invasive species that would dominate an area, thus wiping out all other species and creating an imbalance in the ecosystem. Second, the scientists failed to realize that genetic disorders are random. Two, the smartest people can have a child with a learning disorder, or vice versa. Other genetic disorders, like albinism, Angelman syndrome, and Down syndrome, also happen randomly. Disorders like this can be predicted but cannot be completely erased. Third, eugenics in the wrong hands, like any ideology, can be twisted to complete a powerful person's own agenda, just like Hitler eliminating the Jewish population. When you allow science the power to take away human will, such as who they marry or who they reproduce with, we lose our freedom. This would cause riots and destruction and would cause World War II. But eugenics isn't all bad. Heredity can be used in eugenics to allow mothers-to-be to determine if they should terminate their pregnancy because of a genetic disease or disorder. There is recent research where early detection can give doctors a chance to possibly correct faulty genes. Eugenics could also allow farmers to produce seeds that produce more food, are more drought-tolerant, and are tastier. Eugenics has also been able to make cows produce more milk, horses to run faster, and dog breeds to become smarter.
So some specific examples of eugenics, probably the most universally recognized, is that of Hitler and the Nazis. Hitler called for what he called an Aryan or pure race in his book Mein Kampf and carried that on through his rise to power. And by uniting the German people behind him, they committed millions of atrocities through forced sterilizations and forced executions of what they called unclean or unpure races. And that was solely based on, racial or mental or physical defect. What's being called modern eugenics is genetic engineering and the ability to do prenatal diagnosis and embryo selection is giving parents the ability to find out that if their child may have a defect or a problem before they reach term, and so they can abort the pregnancy, or in like embryo selections, they have the ability to pick what might be a more viable or a better embryo, so that they could have a more favorable pregnancy or child result. Now, with genetic engineering and gene therapy, that is really where you get into what they call the new eugenics, because of the cost prohibitive nature of them. And so what it's doing is it's forcing people of lesser financial means out of the ability to afford it, creating a separation. Now, there's lots of current laws that are still in the books, actually, from quite some time ago, that never really went away, as far as forced sterilizations. I mean, China's one-child policy just ended in 2015 in China, and it forced, or it had a result of people with having a baby with defects or the wrong gender. They were just aborting or leaving their child to die. Now, here at home, we're not any different. In California and in Australia, here as late as 2013, they were doing forced sterilizations of people. Now, the human germline modification, which is a prenatal modification of embryos, has actually been prohibited in 40 countries and a binding treaty by the Council of Europe.
Eugenics has been used correctly and ethically, and it's also been abused. Families and parents only want what's best for their children, and with the advent of eugenics, it is now possible to choose traits desirable to that family. Traits like mental acuity, athletic ability, appearance, they can be chosen. However, we must be careful not to create an overclass, according to Kaplan, McGee, and Magnus. With the advent of programs like stem cell research and the Human Genome Project, the possibility of eliminating diseases such as sickle cell anemia is possible and attainable, I should say. Eugenics has been abused in the past, the Nazis being the most notable abusers of the program. This refers back to my earlier point of being careful to not create an overclass, which seems like what they were trying to do. As with the Nazis, third parties controlling the decisions of what is deemed perfect is something we should be careful to never let happen again. Choices should lie solely with the families. With new laws and legislation in place, families are protected, and laws would prevent third parties dictating the genetic makeup of the population. Elimination of diseases such as Alzheimer's, Down syndrome, Tay-Sachs, can take that worry from people just starting a family or families that are already established. With all of our knowledge of the past and new legislation, the future of eugenics looks bright.